Alright, what is going on, guys? Alex7 here, and today I have a very interesting story for all of you guys, especially for those who are the crew and TDU fans, because let's all be honest, game developers, I feel like they don't really get enough recognition for all of the work that they do, and this story definitely shows it. So without further ado, let's get straight into this. Now, in my opinion, TDU2 was a very good game, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and the same thing with the crew. 1, I'm sure, was pretty good, and the crew 2, I personally love and enjoy playing it. However, there's only one reason as to why the crew exists, and pretty much why TD2 exists, and that all boils down to Atari. Now, a lot of us already know, basically Atari went bankrupt during the time that TD2 was basically supposed to be live. However, there's a lot more to the story, so let's get straight into it. So way back at the time, during TD1, there were two teams at Eden Games. That was the racing team and the action/adventure team. So at the time of TD1, after the release, there was a new game that Atari wanted to publish, and that was Alone in the Dark. So of course, when the first TD was released, it was a pretty good success. However, Alone in the Dark was not finished, so the entire Eden Games attention was shifted to Alone in the Dark. So now keep in mind, around this time there is 150 people working at Eden Games. The racing team obviously is kind of bored about the situation, and that kind of makes sense because obviously you're there to make racing games in TDU, and now you're working on this action/adventure game Alone in the Dark. And around this time, we're in the year 2007, which, if you want to have your stories align very interesting, around that time a company called Ivory Tower was created, and you might know, and here on the screen right now is a snippet of an article that I found online. Basically, it's talking about the founders of Ivory Tower, and it says the idea of starting up as an indie germinated and gathered momentum over the summer of 2007. Now, don't forget this, we're around the year 2007. Now, obviously the members such as Stephen Bailey, who you might know as the creative director of the crew. So he actually quit Eden Games among two other people and decided to form Ivory Tower, which obviously you know is currently the developers of the crew 1 and the crew 2. Now, obviously around this time, there weren't that many people working in the racing team, and a little bit later down the road next year, which is 2008, you may realize that that is when Alone in the Dark released. And for those of you who might have played the game or are aware of the situation of the game didn't do very well at all. And I mean, this is just a metascore of it, of the Xbox 360 version. And keep in mind, this released a little bit later down the road because they had the PS2 version and they had the PS3 and Xbox 360 version. And as you can see, 58 isn't very good with the 5.5 mixed average reviews, so it was a total flop. To be fair, the game didn't do very well at all. Now, obviously around this time, Atari is starting to have financial difficulties, and what do you do when you're about to go broke? You decide to make another game that can get you sales. So Atari basically spent all this money on Alone in the Dark, and they needed to make money back quick. So that is where they decided to make TDU. Now keep in mind, we're around the year 2008 right now, and if you keep in mind, Ivory Tower has now been created and Atari has decided to make TDU, you'll realize that this is where the two games basically are made. Now, if it wasn't for Atari's game being a flop, TD2 may have never actually happened. Who knows? It could have, maybe it couldn't have, or who knows, maybe Ivory Tower wouldn't have been created, or maybe it would have been created later down the road. Who knows? But obviously at the moment, that's what you can basically assume is that Atari, the whole issue behind this is why the crew and TD2 happened. But it doesn't stop there. So at the time, obviously with the amount of people who have left Eden Games, there are now roughly 10 people from the TDU team and 100 people from the action adventure team making TDU2. And when you really think about this, 10 people from a racing game and 100 people from an action and adventure game making TDU2, quite a few people aren't really going to be happy with that situation, and mainly that's the action and adventure people, because after you just made an action and adventure game, you're now making a racing game. So that's kind of interesting. But you see, Atari wanted to make sure they had the best game without paying too much, and obviously that makes sense because at the time they were facing financial difficulty. So what would they have to do? Now, a fun fact, they actually took the engine from TDU1 and they had to make it look like it was new technology. However, it was just the same engine, which is why you're probably wondering as to where this all comes from. Now keep in mind, later down the road, things start to get a bit spicy. Now in 2012, you all know Atari closed Eden Games and Atari France took all the money from TDU2, because at the time Eden Games was obviously under Atari, which if you're a developer, you're not going to be very happy happy about the situation, and that is exactly what happened. And here's a snippet from Atari actually closing. And you guys, I'm sure most of us already know that when we heard this news, we were obviously very shocked and unhappy with what Atari had done, because they had a 4.8 million loss and they had to basically close down and cut ties with people. So now at the time, with all the layoffs, and of course another snippet from when Atari actually laid off from 51 of the 80 employees left at the studio. In April 2012, they announced they would try and separate from the developer due to arguments with the employees and the studio and the parent company. And around that same time, DLC 2 was released for TDU2. So obviously you're kind of thinking, well, after this, I doubt we're actually gonna get anything from Atari, because since Atari owns the franchise TDU, Eden Games can't technically continue support of the game, which is where TDU2 had its fall down and basically was not supported thereon after. So like I said, at the time there were roughly 15 people working at this Eden Games. Much of it was pretty much people that were working in maintenance and probably a 1 or 2 artists who would obviously finish off DLC 2. Around that same time, later on, Ivory Tower was actually bought out by Ubisoft, and that is the Crew story. Now of course, after all of this happened and Eden Games split out, they obviously liquidated and they decided to reopen, which thankfully they did, and I'm very happy that that happened, because a situation like this, it kind of boils your blood. Not even kind of, it does boil your blood. And I mean, take it or leave it, what Atari did wasn't really right, if we're being honest with ourselves. But I'll let you guys comment that down in the section below on what your thoughts are on this situation. Now of course, on October 31st 2013, under the impulsion of former employees and the new financing, Eden Games was reopened as an independent developer, and that's where you guys know that they created GT Spirit or Gear Club Unlimited and Gear Club Unlimited 2, etc, etc. So that is pretty much how the Crew TDU franchise all happened. And thankfully here we are today, where 2016 Big Ben purchased the rights of course now known as Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, which is basically revealed this year. And fun story, there are 2 people from Eden Games that are working on Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, and that is obviously Alan Janu, the main man himself, who worked on TDU2, and of course David Aloza, who was also the technical director of Test Drive Unlimited 2. He now works at Kidoton working on Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. So we do have the Test Drive Unlimited DNA still with us, guys, and it's very exciting, and I cannot wait to find out more news coming on in the new year. But comment down below what your thoughts are on the situation and what you guys think. Let me know. I mean, you kind of already know how I feel about the situation. TD2, I feel like, was definitely bottlenecked by Atari. I feel like there was so much more potential that TD2 had, from the boat DLC, the rally DLC, the track DLC. I have so much more stories to tell you guys about TDU2 and basically all the things that I was supposed to have. But other than that, leave a like on this video, guys, and subscribe for more TDU content and more. Other than that, I'm Ep.2, and I'll see you guys in another video. Peace.